In the previous, we've just been talking about statements, but that's not all we need to report. So let's look at some examples. Actually, even better, let's look at some pictures. In this picture, you see children having fun alone in the room. The mom enters and asks, "What are you doing?" The reported question sounds something like this. The mom asked the children what they were doing. The first important piece of grammar I hope that you notice is that the word order in reported questions is in the same order as the affirmative sentence, not as the question. In this example, the introductory verb ask is in the reported question. But what synonyms of ask do you know? We have other words like inquire, wonder, want to know, and we can use all of these in a reported structure. So let's analyze a few more questions. For example, what have you been up to lately? The reported version of this, my sister asked me what I had been up to lately. Or a second example, where were you last Sunday? She wondered where I was the previous Sunday. Or finally, who were you talking to when I met you yesterday? She wanted to know who I was talking to when she had met me the day before. Here, you have to remember when you're reporting a question to use the appropriate, the past tense form, of the question that you were asked. So, if you noticed, all of the rules that I introduced earlier about tense shifts and the need to change your time expressions remain valid when you are reporting questions. But these have all been special questions using reported speech. Let's look at some general questions. Remember, these are questions that can be answered using yes or no. And they will begin with if or whether in reported speech. For example, if someone asks you, would you like to go skiing? Let's say it's your father. You could report it as, Dad asked me if or whether I would like to go skiing. Another example, have you ever been to Brazil? He asked me if or whether I had ever been to Brazil. But if we're considering disjunctive questions, for example, you will tell us the truth, won't you? You report these as something like, we asked her to tell us the truth. Here, your question tags will disappear in reported speech. They are not used and you cannot use them. So this is nothing too difficult. Just remember that the word order and the conjunctions in reported questions are used without the question words. Now, quite often we need to report commands as well as instructions, suggestions, offers, etc. But to do this, we need to make use of some special introductory verbs, such as to offer, to suggest, to demand, to advise, to order, to remind, to warn, to threaten, or even to command. Now, remember that some of these are followed by to with the infinitive, and others are followed by a gerund, and you will need to know these. There's not really a simple rule that you can follow, so these will be necessary for you to learn and know which requires which. But let's look at some examples, and hopefully this will make things a little bit easier. The first example, the policeman said to him, "Stop the car immediately." Reported as, the policeman ordered him to stop the car. Or a second example, will you please carry this bag home? Granny asked me to carry that bag home. Now, be careful here because the phrase this changes to that in the reported speech. Now, the next example, do you feel like going to the park? She asked me whether I felt like going to the park, or she suggested going to the park. Here, she suggested requires the gerund. She suggested going to the park. The next example, don't talk during the exam. The teacher said not to talk during the exam with the infinitive. Next, can I help you? The shop assistant offered to help me. Again, offered with the infinitive. Now that's about all for reported speech, but just to make sure that you understand it, let's do a little test together. I'm going to tell you two sentences and I want you to identify the correct one. Let's start. She said to me she was upset, or she said me she was upset. Right, she said to me. Remember, said requires an object, or requires to if you are using an object with it. The next examples. Jake said that everybody is at home. Jake said everybody was at home. Correct. The second example here is in fact grammatically correct because Jake said everybody was. It needs the past tense. Next, he wondered, where is Sarah? And he wondered where Sarah was. Good. Here, he wondered where Sarah was is correct because the word order, well, there are actually two problems here. The word order, where Sarah was, just like for an affirmative statement, and where Sarah was in the past tense because wondered is also being used in the past tense. In the next set, he insisted to not leave that place, or he insisted not to leave that place. Correct. The second here is right once again. He insisted not to leave that place. Remember the word order here with not. And one more example. She told me she may talk to her colleague, or she told me she might talk to her colleague. Very good. The second one is correct here because we are using the appropriate tense for might. In reported speech, may should always transform into might. So I'm sure that reported speech will be a little bit of a stumbling block for you, but be sure to review this lesson a few times and to study the extra materials. In tables 1 and 2, you will see both time expressions and how they change from direct to indirect speech or reported speech, as well as in table 2, the necessary changes to verb tenses when you go from direct to indirect speech. Be sure to review these and know these very, very well. I'm sure that if you look over these a few times, all of this will be very easy for you in the future. I'll see you soon.